Okay, everyone, you have to ignore the conspiracy board behind me for the entirety of this video. I was completely normal while scripting this video. I didn't do anything weird. Yeah. Anyways. Hey, howdy, hi. My name is Onomatopoeia, and I'm a digital artist and quite a big art history nerd. Art history was always a class I had a ton of fun in. We had really passionate professors and staff at my university who just made learning extra fun. And I didn't have to make any art, which was always nice to get a break in my schedule. So when I found out that PragerU put out some videos about art, and they were spouting some bullshit, I just had to say something. Ethan is Online, who is one of my favorite content creators, is actually where I found out this information. They made a video on the topic, but they didn't delve too far into art history, so I kind of felt the urge to fill in some of the gaps and add on to their video a little bit. If you don't know, miraculously, what PragerU is, first of all, congratulations. Second of all, I'm sorry to be the one to ruin it for you. I really am. Prager University is a self-described educational platform that promotes American values. They're like dedicated to it. It's like the first line in their YouTube description. So I just want you to know that that is code for right-wing propaganda. And, you know, some of their biggest hits include don't follow your passions, there is no gender wage gap, and why is modern art so bad? Which, if you haven't guessed, is one of the videos we're going to talk about today. It's pretty crazy to me that a political party has decided to be fully against art movements as a whole, but I guess that's the dystopian hellscape we're living in these days, isn't it? Luckily for us, that shitbag Dennis Prager isn't the host of these two videos, but Robert Florzak, who is equally as disturbing, so not much of a win. Unlike PragerU, I don't make you externally look for my sources. They're all going to be down below in the description. However, a lot of this is straight from the noggin because of those art history classes, but I do have all of my notes from those classes, so if anyone is interested, just let me know and I can post those too. One other thing before we dive into the cesspool. Huh? Dive? Pool? Anyways, before we dive into this cesspool, I'm going to be talking about two different PragerU videos today. The first one is Why is Modern Art So Bad?, which was filmed and put out about 8 years ago now. The second is called Why is Classical Art So Good?, and it was put out about 7 months ago. Both are hosted by Robert Florzak, and unfortunately for him, in between the two videos, he's lost a lot of hair. Which I'm only telling you because it made more sense for my video structure for me to kind of intersplice the clips of the two different videos, so he'll probably be growing and losing and growing and losing his hair quite a bit in this video. I hope it traumatizes him. Now, Robert has just an absolutely massive hard-on for art that was created in the 16th through 19th centuries. This is often referred to as the classical period, but it is because of the imagery that it depicted.
Artists enriched Western society with their works of astonishing beauty. Master after master, from Leonardo to Rembrandt to Bierstadt, produced works that inspired, uplifted, and deepened us.
There was a ranked list at the time of acceptable painting subject matter, number one being history. More specifically, though, antiquity, which is the depiction of classical Greek and Roman myth. It doesn't, of course, mean that this is the classical way to make art and that we should all strive to operate under classicism. I don't know if Robert knows that, though, because when you look at his art, it looks like he's trying to be one of the classical painters and use all of their techniques, but he doesn't have a firm enough grasp on why those techniques should be used, and it just leaves his pieces feeling dull and lifeless, and like his poses have so much movement, but at the same time, the pieces themselves just don't. It's bizarre choice, I think. He then moves into saying that composition, line, texture, color, movement, and form are the rules for art. No, they're not. They're the principles of art and design, sure, but they're one of those rule sets, and I say rule loosely here, that you learn so you can learn how to break them.
Classical art is so good because it was produced within the demanding standards and refined principles of aesthetics. Painting, drawing, and sculpture employ a number of characteristics to create beauty. Each of these is present in any work of art worthy of being called art.
There are plenty of artists who are always subverting these principles, and there are plenty of other artists who have never even been trained under the principles. That doesn't mean their art is bad or not art, like Robert is implying. The one that gets me the most out of this list, though, is color. You're gonna tell me that, like, all of the black and white pieces ever created aren't art? You're gonna tell me that this Da Vinci isn't art because it's an unfinished underpainting? Really? Which, not to flex, but I have seen this Da Vinci in person, and it's massive and gorgeous, and it's art. There's a reason it's in an art museum. So, and you can't expect all of art to follow one movement's techniques. Every movement and the type of art created in it are informed by their time period. It's just a fact of art that I don't think you can avoid.
They cared primarily about creating art that looked good.
Their goal also isn't to make good art. Sure, plenty of artists want their art to be good, but their main goal was actually to educate. During this time, you still have a good chunk of the populace who can't read, so they're effectively trying to tell history through their art.
The quality is there in the controlled balance of its composition, the harmony of its color, the masterful hand-eye coordination of its brushwork. When we look more closely at the soft edge between the woman's arm and her sleeve, we can see that it was achieved by Vermeer's delicate application of paint. This is the very essence of artistic quality.
Yes, there are techniques that the classical artists kind of founded, like a more pyramidal composition, or pieces with a strong fore, middle, and background, but that doesn't mean that all art needs to operate under those standards. Like I was hinting at, inspiration for classical artists came from things like the excavations in Pompeii, which reignited the curiosity for ancient Greek and Roman culture. There were also a lot of landscapes produced during this time. Number one, because it was another acceptable thing that you could create, but number two, because of things like the Grand Tour. The Grand Tour allowed common folk to go experience Europe and all of the monuments and history there for themselves. Scientific discovery was also new and exciting. So you have pieces like An Experiment on the Bird in the Air Pump that show the simultaneous curiosity and fear that people were feeling about these new technologies. This is another piece that I'm gonna flex that I've seen in person. It's beautiful and like way bigger than you would think. And it is a little morbid, sure, but one can still appreciate the lighting techniques and other things used to create it.
But also the subject matter has gone from the transcendent to the trashy. Where once artists applied their talents to scenes of substance and integrity from history, literature, religion, mythology, etc., how can art be objectively measured? I'm challenged. In responding, I simply point to the artistic results produced by universal standards compared to what is produced by relativism. And who will determine quality is another challenge I'm given. If we are to be intellectually honest, we all know of situations where professional expertise is acknowledged and depended upon.
In my humble opinion, it kind of seems like Robert would like to see the rebirth of the academies. If you don't know, the art academies were the end-all be-all in the classical period. They trained the artists, they decided who could be artists and graduate from their programs, and they were the ones telling painters what subject matter was allowed to be depicted. This sounds right up Mr. Florzak's alley. Maybe Robert and PragerU should start their own art academy and see if anyone gives a shit about what they have to say. A lot of artists, even at the time, found the academies really restrictive and oppressive. By the time the Impressionists had got on the scene, the artists kind of didn't care anymore and just had started to depict what they wanted to. They were kind of sick of just some white guy telling them what they can and can't paint.
But something happened on the way to the 20th century. The profound, the inspiring, and the beautiful were replaced by the new, the different, and the ugly.
The Impressionists are what PragerU is upset about when they talk about the new, the different, and the ugly. Yeah, the Impressionists are in the ugly category. Van Gogh Impressionism. Degas Impressionism. Monet Impressionism. That's who doesn't make supremely enlightened art. It's not realistic enough for you? Boo-hoo! That's the fucking point! It was supposed to be an impression of what they were looking at. Instead of focusing on the details, artists were more concerned with the color and the lighting of a moment coming across in their works.
The Impressionists rebelled against the French Académie des Beaux-Arts and its demand for classical standards. The new modernists sowed the seeds of aesthetic relativism, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder mentality.
And sure, I guess you could call them rebels, but it wasn't in the way that Robert means. It was just because they didn't want to deal with the oppressive academies from the classical period. Just like with Impressionism, a lot of the artists from the 20th century are pretty common names too. You've probably seen a lot of art from this time period before, and you've connected to it.
Today, the silly, the pointless, and the purely offensive are held up as the best of modern art.
That's why Robert won't show you any examples. You would immediately believe he was wrong because people like Picasso, Dali, and Warhol are included in his silly, pointless, and purely offensive categories. The cool thing with a lot of these 20th century artists is that they were the first to do something. Picasso is widely regarded as the father of Cubism, Dali with Surrealism, and Warhol with pop art. Them doing something new and exciting was what gained them public notoriety.
What do we look for to determine quality in art? It is found in the skillful execution of a visual medium. Art, by definition, is a visual medium. Therefore, its meaning and ability to make you think are secondary to how it looks. But the visual is what uniquely distinguishes art. Therefore, the visual is what most matters. When a visual medium becomes more about what it means and less about its pure visual experience, it has failed as art.
Many other artists in the 20th century sought to elevate art as something more than just a visual experience. It was about how they made it, what they made it from, and what the final piece looked like. But art especially became about why it was made. It became an intellectual viewing process just as much as an aesthetic one. Which, Robert, that's totally fine if it's too much for your little pea brain to handle, but please don't ruin it for the rest of us. And you absolutely cannot get mad at the art just because you didn't take time to sit there and understand why it was made. Now, the next movement that I'm gonna bring up, Robert doesn't directly show any examples of, but I honestly think that's because a lot of his conservative fan base would see some of the anti-war images from this movement and just straight up have a heart attack on the spot. Dada, an art movement defined by the idea of being a producer rather than a creator, was informed by a lot of anti-war sentiments, mostly pushed by artists who were traumatized veterans. It's also the art movement that ready-mades were born from. Dada is one of my favorite art movements. It's so anarchist and such a pure human expression, in my opinion. I just love it so much. The whole point was that they were rebelling against classical art movements and their oppressive art academies. Throughout their works, there's a lot of images of machinery mixed with everyday life. And this is because Dadaists really got into the idea of photo collage. And they were making pieces in a time where photos were readily available now through magazines. So you see a lot of advertisements being cut and paste around heavy war machinery. The Dadaists were kind of just mad at everything, and they really wanted to stick it to the man through their work. And honestly, what better way to do that than to enter a urinal into an art competition? Fountain is a ready-made, and what a ready-made is basically a found object that takes on a new meaning once an artist gets their hands on it. So, Duchamp used a urinal to convey to viewers that art can be more than something pretty. It can be a concept, even. And it's not like art like this was immediately accepted by the general populace. Duchamp specifically faced a lot of backlash from art critics, and Fountain, the piece I've been talking about, was rejected from several art galleries before it ended up in one. Ready-mades as a whole kind of got this treatment. A lot of people were quick to say that it wasn't art, but some people saw the beauty in it. Quote, "Whether Mr. Mutt with his own hands made the fountain or not has no importance. He chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, created a new thought for that object." Robert then moves on to talk more specifically about the principles and do some fun little comparison and contrasts under each category.
Composition, for instance, is the positioning of objects, elegant and controlled in the hands of a master, or awkward and haphazard in the hands of the inept.
He first shows The Music Lesson by Frederick Leighton and Woman 2 by de Kooning to talk about composition. But the way he draws the compositional lines or structure over the de Kooning piece makes no sense to me. Personally, I would make the composition look something more like this, and if you look at the background, you can kind of see how the brush strokes force your eye into the middle where the figure is seated. Of course, it's fairly abstract and maybe hard to read, but I feel like they were intentionally being dense about this one. It's just super egregious to me. De Kooning isn't gonna be everyone's favorite artist. I mean, he's not mine, but I do think he produces really cool pieces. He's also incredibly dedicated to the craft. Woman 2 is actually part of a 6-piece series. Woman 1 took him 2 years to complete alone. It's not like he's hurriedly throwing brushstrokes on the canvas and then putting it in a museum to make a quick buck. He employed using techniques inspired from Picasso, like shifting proportions and replacing body parts. He also almost shows the figure from multiple angles, which is a technique from the Cubists. In his pieces, de Kooning was interested in exploring how the female body was used for advertising, specifically the fake smiles that women would have to put on. He was also vaguely interested in the femme fatale, but to me, the Woman series more focuses on those fake smiles in advertising. In 1956, when de Kooning was absolutely killing it, a critic named Rudy Blesch said this about him and Jackson Pollock. "A remarkable rugged lot, with minds as well as muscled as their bodies. They are built like athletes, some of them. Pollock and de Kooning paint like athletes. If pictures could explode, theirs would. So grimly by the force of their wills have compressed their dual masculinity onto the canvas." I think that dedication and aggression does really show in both of these artists' works. Next, Robert decides that it's time to harp on color.
Color can be exquisitely balanced and harmonious, or garishly random and unsavory.
For the comparison, he shows an oleander, painted by Lawrence Alma Tadema, and the second piece is actually the middle of a triptych, meaning a series of 3 pieces that are meant to go together, done by Francis Bacon. And it is called The 3 Studies for a Crucifixion. I hadn't heard of this work before, so I guess thank you to Robert for introducing me to something cool, new, and metal, but I'm not gonna give him points on that one, so I take back my thank you, Robert. In the biopic that I could find on Bacon, he says that he treats religion like an allegory for human suffering, which is very interesting. So in this depiction, instead of a crucified Jesus, it's a dismembered figure, which if you ask me, honestly isn't too far off from all of the depictions of Jesus suffering on the cross. Either way, he's dying a traumatic death, and I guess, gore level is different and all of that, but for the sake of this video, Robert isn't mad about the gore. He's mad about the color palette. The analogous color palette. The palette that is so close in shade, it could basically be a monochromatic color palette. He's mad about that. A monochromatic color palette is not a disarray or whatever the fuck he says. It's a normal color palette that plenty of people use in art, and it's very pleasing to the eye. So I don't know what your problem is. Honestly, the de Kooning piece from 2 seconds ago would have almost been a better example, but to me, none of their color palettes are displeasing, so I don't know what he's on.
Movement can be uplifting and dynamic, or static and perverse.
The next absolutely cherry-picked example is the comparison between Gian Lorenzo Bernini's David and Paul McCarthy's Tree. What's wrong, PragerU? I thought you guys liked Christmas. You guys literally have a video titled Just Say Merry Christmas. He's just getting in the festive spirit. It's a Christmas tree. All jokes aside though, right-wingers in Paris have assaulted this artist and vandalized his piece multiple times over the fact that it kind of looks like a butt plug. And assaulting people is illegal and not cool. It's fine if you disagree with an art piece, but that doesn't mean that you get to put your hands on it or the person who made it. Personally, I think Robert should have gone all out and picked another piece from Paul McCarthy. I think he should have picked the piece that depicts a little robot, George Bush, f***ing some pigs. It's really funny, and I like it better than Tree.
How did the 1,000-year ascent towards artistic perfection and excellence die out? It didn't. It was pushed out.
Like I said, it's just really obvious that Robert is cherry-picking all of these examples to fit into the narrative of this video, because if he, could look at art from this time period for more than 2.0 seconds, he would see that there are people who are still operating under the classical techniques that he's so into. I mean, look at an artist like Kehinde Wiley. He's making pieces that rival the classical artists while still continuing to use the techniques that they employed. So, what's wrong, Robert? What's wrong with this artist? Are the classical techniques only good when white people use them? Is that what the issue is here? Now, at this point in the videos and my research, it became pretty apparent to me that Robert does not know that art, besides paintings and sculptures, exists. I don't think he's ever heard of a performance piece. Believe it or not, Robert, some pieces of art are meant to be an experience. Take Yoko Ono, someone who's known for her performance pieces. In one of my art history classes, we talked about cut piece, which is a work where she sits down wearing her favorite dress across from an audience and offers them scissors. She allows them to cut off the dress as they please. Sometimes it can get violent, and sometimes it went peaceful and more respectable than others. She liked the fact that it was different every time, though. She liked that it was this ephemeral moment of trust between her and an audience. Robert's example of an experience piece is Levitated Mass at the LA County Art Museum.
Michelangelo carved his David out of a rock. The Los Angeles County Museum of Art just offers us a rock. A rock. All 340 tons of it. That's how far standards have fallen.
The whole point of this piece is that you get to walk under a massive boulder. It's like 380 pounds or something like that, and it's only supported by these 2 brackets and concrete pillars. The whole point, to me, is that it engages the sublime. You're walking under something, and you could stand under something that could kill you in an instant, but because it's being held up by tiny pieces of metal, you're completely safe. That's what's cool about it, but I guarantee that Robert is looking at it behind a screen and then wondering why he doesn't understand it.
That's just a stupid boulder! It's not just a boulder. It's a rock.
Art has always been and will always be about social commentary. That's not to say all art is social commentary, though. Obviously not, but art has always been used as a tool to communicate social unrest.
In fact, the great artists of the past didn't care one whit about reflecting their times.
Sure. They totally didn't care. Nope, they've been reflecting their time since day one, bro. Remember what I said about antiquity and why it was being produced when it was? Yeah, that's because that's artists giving a wit about reflecting their times. Is art just simply a reflection of its time? No, it's not that either, but it is a huge chunk of it. I probably would be a lot more focused on the war if I was an artist in the 1940s, more so than animated men and women. I would also consider the next two pieces that Robert brings up to be social commentary pieces as well.
The former gave the world the birth of Venus and the dying Gaul, while the latter has given us the Holy Virgin Mary, fashioned with cow dung and pornographic images, and Petra, the prize-winning sculpture of a policewoman squatting and urinating, complete with a puddle of synthetic urine.
Petra, the sculpture of a German policewoman peeing, is honestly super cool. If not just for the technical aspect, but like, she has her own little puddle, and that's just like she could have been pre-peeing. No, she's peed already. I can honestly see why it can be interpreted as pretty vulgar, though, and especially for the audience of PragerU, conservative-leaning people, this one might feel a little disrespectful to the piggies. But the artist says that that's not what it's about. A jury awarded her an award for this piece, and when asked why, they said, "It shows very well the difference between the public and the private sphere." Which is an interesting take. I think for sure it does, because, you know, it's one of our very public officials doing something that you do very much only when you're in private. The artists themselves say that the response that they get to the piece is really positive overall, so I guess it's just Robert and PragerU that take issue with this one. The next painting he brings up is called the Holy Virgin Mary. It's a painting with cow dung and pornographic images, which seems like such an obvious PragerU choice. I honestly was scared that Robert was gonna like go on this whole tirade and start screaming about blasphemy when he brought up this piece, but thankfully, no. When I looked up this piece, though, I did find out this little interesting tidbit. Quote, Mayor Rudy Giuliani threatened to close the city-funded institution on the grounds that this artwork was offensive to religious viewers. 2 months later, the painting, which rests upon 2 large balls of elephant dung, was desecrated by an elderly visitor who smeared white paint over its surface, claiming that the image was blasphemous. First of all, PragerU, it's elephant dung, which is way more luxurious than cow dung. Secondly, we've got another group of people targeting art to a point of vandalism, and once again, not cool, guys. Thirdly, the artist himself, Chris O'Feely, I think I pronounced that right, said, quote, "The sacred and the profane are not always opposed, even in traditional religious art. As an altar boy, I was confused by the idea of a Holy Virgin Mary giving birth to a young boy. Now when I go to the National Gallery and see paintings of the Virgin Mary, I see how sexually charged they are. Mine is simply a hip-hop version." I think another reason PragerU doesn't like this is because it's titled The Holy Virgin Mary while depicting someone of darker skin. Quote, "The parody-like African mouth and exaggerated facial features call to attention racial stereotypes, as well as to the assumed whiteness of biblical figures in Western representations. O'Feely's icon asks us to confront the possibility of a Black Virgin Mary."
Unlike the inspirational work of the past, much of today's art exposes how coarse and vulgar a society we've become.
And I mean, if we'll be honest here, the vulgarity in art is nothing new either. When nude paintings and photos eventually popped up on the scene, people were like kind of outraged about it. Same with when political cartoons and satire came out, like Gargantua. Gargantua is a piece depicting the king taking the wealth from the poor. He is seated above them, and they all run up a little ramp to directly shovel money into his mouth. The king looks fairly grotesque and is exaggerated, as is the style with most political satire art. This comic honestly feels a little too on brand for me, though, so we're gonna have to move past it before I have a breakdown. This is where Robert gets even stupider, which I know, hard to imagine that that's possible, but it is.
Many of today's artists merely use their art to make statements, often for nothing more than shock value. Standards declined until there were no standards. All that was left was personal expression.
He starts this little tirade in each video about how art shouldn't make a statement or be about personal expression. And if Robert wants art to just be pretty pictures, that's cool. If you want to look at art with absolutely no thought required, go for it. Just don't make it mine and other artists' responsibility to cater to you. Robert also thinks that if people stop buying what he deems modern art, that people won't make it anymore.
By the art we patronize at museums or purchase at galleries, we can make our opinions not only known but felt. An art gallery, after all, is a business like any other. If the product doesn't sell, it won't be made.
And I hate to break it to him, but there is literally a whole trope about us being starving, so I don't think money is really going to be the motivator you think it will be, Robert. We don't really operate under that same capitalistic hellscape that you do. We make what we want to make. I would much rather spend longer looking for an audience that likes what I make than start making some classical-like shit to appease people like Robert. The beauty of art is its subjectiveness. Preferences are okay. Certain art is meant to make you feel something, but certain art is not meant to make you feel anything at all. And some art makes some people feel something and not others. I don't really use my art as a deep and introspective thing. I draw to tell a character's story or convey something specific about the world that they live in. Wanting me and other artists to take away our originality and replace it with stories that have already been told just sounds like a sad little world that you want to live in. Art is the best when it's diverse and different and truly creative. Even artists back in the classical period thought these regulations for art were stuffy. Robert then moves on to trying to solidify this term of objective standards in art.
The great art historian Jacob Rosenberg wrote that quality in art is not merely a matter of personal opinion, but to a high degree objectively traceable.
When he's doing this little argument, he voices two main concerns about the art world without objective standards. Number one, how will we know what art is good? And number two, how will we know if we're being taken for a sucker?
Without aesthetic standards, we have no way to determine quality or inferiority.
You might be thoroughly impressed with the work of a cutting-edge artist with its impressive theory, but you have no way of knowing if you're being taken for a sucker.
Obviously, the way that we know art is good is based on our own personal preferences. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so there's so much different stuff out there. There is literally something for everyone to enjoy, even Robert. And there are plenty of modern artists doing what he would like to see. He's just not interested in actually putting forth the effort to seek them out. He'd just rather have modern art support his confirmation bias. And if you're worried about art tricking you, I think you need to re-examine why you're going to art museums and how you're thinking about art. Most artists are making art for the joy of making, and having it up where people can see it is a huge accomplishment for us. It's not something that's easy to obtain either. You can't just make what you deem a shitty painting in 2 seconds and go put it up in an art museum. Also, It takes modern artists quite a bit of time, even abstract expressionists, to make their work. Just because it looks simple to you doesn't mean it is. And hey, if there is an artist out there whose goal it is to trick ya, good for them. I'm also willing to bet with 99% certainty that they're not trying to trick you in the way that Robert thinks they are. You, on the other hand, Mr. Forzak, admit to being a little trickster in this video.
Here's a test I give my graduate students, all talented and well-educated. Please analyze this Jackson Pollock painting and explain why it is good. It is only after they give very eloquent answers that I inform them that the painting is actually a close-up of my studio apron. I don't blame them. I would probably have done the same, since it's nearly impossible to differentiate between the two.
Robert, this is such a lie, because no art history teacher would ever ask their students, let alone their grad students, to describe to them why an art piece is good. That's not what art history is. We analyze the skills, techniques, and contexts a piece was made with. My art history professor literally re-taught us how to look at pieces so that we could do this successfully. If you want to learn, it's a 5-step process. Step 1, which is slow looking. That means that you're going to take in every inch of this piece that you're looking at before you. Take in even the frame and look at all of the details and make sure you're not missing anything. Number 2, you're going to jump into the actual formal analysis. So this is your argument based off of the visual evidence that you collected in step 1. At this point, you're also supposed to take a stance to create a discussion about the work. Thirdly, look at subject matter and iconography. So what are the immediately recognizable depictions? How many figures are in the room? Things like that. Number 4, it's the method of comparison and contrast. So take a similar piece from the same time period, or maybe they use the same techniques or composition, and compare and contrast them and see if you can gain anything from that. Finally, you're going to do your contextual analysis, which is often historical, and it's the consideration of the artwork in relation to aesthetic, economic, political, and social issues of the time. Personally, I would be really upset if I walked into an art history class and this was the caliber of the questions being asked of me. So much so that I would probably drop the class and just report the professor to the university. Also, you're being so ignorant, because I know you don't legitimately think that your dirty-ass apron looks like a Pollock painting. Pollock spent so much time on these big-ass canvases, watering down paint to a specific level and standing physically in his pieces to create them. And you're gonna tell me that those look similar to you, to an apron that you took a little brush on and just wiped it all over? No. 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 He finally starts to wrap up his claims while blaming art history professors from the humanities for assigning meaning to art.
Art is a matter of personal taste. There's no such thing as great art or bad art. Where do these assumptions come from? For the most part, they are the result of art histories written and taught over the last century, not by artists, but by those in the humanities and social sciences. Not having an artist's point of view or experience, let alone artistic talent, these authors and teachers have therefore framed art in the only language they understand, meaning and social significance.
Which, I'm pretty sure that the artists themselves are the sources for these art history professors from the humanities. So I think you're just gonna have to take the L on this one, Robert. Admit you're wrong. I'm waiting.
3 weeks later. Many months later. So much later that the old narrator got tired of waiting and they had to hire a new one.
Guys, I'm tired of waiting. Art has and will always have meaning. Whether intentional or not, someone is always going to look at a piece and derive meaning from it. That's just the human experience. Also, not to nitpick, Robert, but the art historian that you quoted before, Jacob, well, I'm having a really hard time finding any of his art pieces. Oh, and The full quote actually adds in some context that kind of refutes your whole point in general. It reads, "Artistic value or quality in a work of art is not merely a matter of personal opinion, but to a high degree also a matter of common agreement among artistically sensitive and trained observers, and to a high degree objectively traceable. Our value judgment is a composite of subjective and objective elements. Subjective, I call those which are purely personal responses of an individual. Objective, those which are agreed upon by trained observers and therefore meet with general acceptance. The composite nature of a value judgment leaves room for the strengthening of the objective aspect, thus allowing us to attain a measure of validity. This is then what we are striving for in our investigation." So, yeah, Jacob is literally saying that there is a subjective. Of course, he does say there is an objective in art, but I personally think he's referring to, like, the principles of design, and in some cases, there are just objective things that can make your art better. I wouldn't say that can make your art good, but better. But, you know, Robert doesn't even really believe that the subjective exists when critiquing art, so he conveniently left that part of the quote out. He also brings up this, like, really terrible figure skating analogy in which he implies that a lot of modern artists, specifically I'm gathering abstract expressionists, that they basically throw themselves on the ice and demand for a first place prize.
Take figure skating in the Olympics, where artistic excellence is judged by experts in the field. Surely we would flinch at the contestant who indiscriminately threw himself across the ice and demanded that his routine be accepted as being as worthy of value as that of the most disciplined skater.
Which is just a horrible analogy because there is a direct measurable quality of good and bad in figure skating, and if someone intentionally subverted things to do a traditionally bad figure skating routine, it would probably still be seen as an artistic choice that they made. Also, modern artists are still using skill, effort, and technique to make what they make. It took them way longer than most people think to complete a piece. With all of Robert's bullshit aside, I just wanted to say, art is personal taste, though. That's why several times in this video I've said that certain artists and pieces aren't for everyone, because they're not. People have different experiences that shape them and the things they enjoy. The whole point of art is to find something that you like. Everyone is going to make differently, and everyone is going to view those creations differently. That's the beauty of it. A standard of quality is oppressive, just as the academies were during classicism. It wouldn't surprise me if PragerU really just thought art was better when only white men were making it, which kind of seems to be the point being made here. Back when classical artists were doing what they were doing, the academies only allowed people who had money and were men and white in. So you can see how I can draw that connection pretty quickly. In conclusion, make what you want to make, like what you want to like. Robert and PragerU are dense as shit, and no one should pay any attention to what they have to say. Pay attention to me instead. I'm cool. Which, oh my god, holy shit, you guys have been paying so much attention to me, and I just wanted to say thank you all so much. Oh my god, I have like almost 600 subs now, or over 600. It's so crazy to me that I posted that first commentary video, Art Lore is a Plague, on TikTok, and I had 33 subscribers, and now I have, I think, over 600, and that's just insane. Thank you guys for blowing up that video, for all of your comments and likes and subscribes. It means the world to me, and thank you for your engagement on this one. I gotta do my whole little YouTuber plug thing, so please make sure to like and subscribe and comment. I am honestly kind of running out of art commentary ideas, but I would love to do more of these videos. They're super fun for me to research, and I kind of feel like I get a little taste of commentary at YouTube, which is my favorite thing to view. So if you have any ideas, please let me know down below. DM me on Instagram, send me a link in Discord, whatever's the easiest method for you. I would love to do more of these. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye! Did I do it? I did it. Oh my god, I did it.